The war drums of the Varkari Empire echoed through the grand halls of the imperial palace. Princess Xyra stood tall on the balcony, watching as her soldiers trained in the courtyard below. She was the Empire's fiercest warrior, undefeated in battle, feared across the galaxy. Her people believed in one thing: strength, and Xyra had never met anyone stronger than herself. Today, however, she had a new prisoner, a human. Xyra had fought against many species, but humans had always been an annoyance rather than a true challenge. They were weaker, smaller, and their technology was far behind the Varkaris. Yet they never surrendered. That alone made them interesting. She walked down the dimly lit corridors, her heavy boots echoing against the metal floor. 2 guards stood outside the cell door, their spears crossed. They saluted as she approached. "He has not spoken a word, Your Highness," one of them reported. Xyra smirked. "Then let's see if we can change that." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a simple cold room. In the center sat a man, his wrists bound in energy cuffs. His uniform was torn, his face bruised, but his eyes were sharp and full of defiance. "So," Xyra said, stepping inside, "this is the mighty human soldier who dared to challenge the Empire." The man tilted his head, studying her. Then, to her surprise, he grinned. "You must be the fearless princess they keep talking about," he said, his voice calm. "Nice to finally meet you." Xyra raised an eyebrow. Most prisoners trembled in her presence. This one didn't. "I am Princess Xyra, heir to the Varkari throne," she said proudly. "And you are?" "Captain Ilias Carter, United Earth Defense Forces," he replied. "And I'd shake your hand, but well." He lifted his bound wrists slightly. Xyra chuckled, though she didn't know why. This human was amusing. "Tell me, Captain Carter, why did your people even bother resisting? You must have known you couldn't win." Elias leaned back against the cold wall. "Maybe. But humans don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because we refuse to kneel." Xyra narrowed her eyes. "Is that so?" "That's so." Elias smirked. "And between you and me, Princess, I don't think you brought me here just for interrogation. I think you're curious." Xyra stiffened. No one ever dared speak to her like that. And yet she found herself intrigued. Humans were weak, but this one had something different, something dangerous. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Curious, perhaps, but don't mistake curiosity for mercy, human. I will break you." Elias met her gaze without fear. "You can try." For the first time in her life, Princess Xyra wondered if she had finally met her match. Princess Xyra had interrogated many prisoners in her life. Most broke within hours. Some begged, some cried, some swore loyalty to the Varkari Empire just to escape the pain. But this human, Captain Ilias Carter, was different. It had been 3 days since his capture, and yet he showed no fear, no desperation, no sign of surrender. Xyra sat on her throne, watching the holographic reports of the war. The humans were losing, their forces scattered. Their worlds were falling one by one. It was only a matter of time before the Varkari Empire crushed them completely. So why was this single human so calm? Her thoughts were interrupted by one of her officers. "Your Highness, the human prisoner is still refusing to cooperate." Xyra smirked. "Good. I was getting bored." Moments later, she stood outside Elias Carter's cell once again. The guards saluted and opened the door. Inside, Elias sat on the cold floor, leaning against the wall as if he had all the time in the world. His uniform was still dirty, his face still bruised, but his eyes, those sharp, confident eyes, had not changed. "You again," Elias said with a grin. "I was starting to think you forgot about me." Xyra stepped inside, arms crossed. "I have many responsibilities, Captain Carter. A single human prisoner is not my priority." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And yet here you are." Zyra felt a flicker of irritation. This man had no weapons, no allies, and no way to escape, yet he acted as if he was the one in control. "I have a question for you, human," she said, ignoring his remark. "Why do your people fight so hard when you know you will lose?" Elias tilted his head, as if considering her words. Then he smiled. "Because we don't fight for survival alone. We fight for something bigger." Zyra frowned. "Bigger than survival? Foolish." Elias chuckled. "Maybe to you, but humans, we fight for family, for friends, for freedom. Even if we lose, we don't stop fighting." Zyra studied him. His words were strange. The Valkyrie believed in strength above all else. They conquered because it was their nature. They ruled because they were superior. But humans, they fought not because they were strong, but because they refused to give up. "You think your spirit will save you?" she asked, stepping closer. "That it will change your fate?" Elias smirked. "It already has. You should have executed me by now. But instead, you keep coming back. So tell me, princess, who's really in control here?" Zyra's fists clenched. No one had ever dared to speak to her like this. No one had ever looked at her with such fearless defiance. She should have been angry. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous. Curiosity. Princess Zyra had always believed that strength was the ultimate weapon. But after spending days trying to break Captain Elias Carter, she was beginning to question that belief. This human was different. He had no weapons, no soldiers, and no chance of escape. Yet, somehow, he was winning. Zyra entered the cell once again, her expression calm but her mind full of questions. Elias was sitting against the wall, just as before. He looked tired, his face still bruised, but when he saw her, he smiled. "I was wondering when you'd visit again," Elias said, stretching his arms despite the energy cuffs around his wrists. "Miss me?" Zyra scoffed. "Don't flatter yourself, human." Elias chuckled. "Oh, I wouldn't dare. But I have to ask, why are you here? Shouldn't a mighty princess like you be leading armies, conquering planets?" Tahira narrowed her eyes. "I am exactly where I need to be." Elias smirked. "If you say so." She stepped closer, staring down at him. "You think this is a game?" Elias met her gaze, unshaken. "No, but I think you're more interested in talking to me than you'd like to admit." Zyra hated that he was right. She had interrogated hundreds of prisoners before. They all begged, screamed, or cursed her name. But Elias? He challenged her, not with weapons, but with words. And worst of all, she was starting to enjoy it. "You speak as if you are my equal," Zyra said, tilting her head. Elias shrugged. "I speak as if I'm human, and humans don't bow so easily." Zyra crossed her arms. "That arrogance will be your downfall." Elias grinned. "Maybe. Or maybe it's why I'm still alive." Zyra studied him in silence. He was right. By now, any other prisoner would have been executed. But this human had something different, something that made her hesitate. She had always been taught that strength meant power. But Elias showed her another kind of strength, one she couldn't easily defeat. And that unsettled her. She turned away, heading for the door. "Tomorrow, you will face one of my warriors in unarmed combat. If you lose, you die." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And if I win?" Zyra smirked. "Then I will grant you one request." Elias leaned back, his smile never fading. "Now that sounds interesting." Zyra left without another word, but as she walked down the corridor, she couldn't shake a strange feeling. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure who would win. The arena was silent as Princess Zyra took her seat on the high platform. Around her, Valkyrie warriors stood in disciplined rows, eager to witness the battle. The air was thick with tension. At the center of the arena, Captain Elias Carter stood tall, his hands unshackled for the first time since his capture. He rolled his shoulders, testing his freedom, while his opponent, A towering Valkyrie named Vekros stretched his massive arms. Vekros was a champion among the Valkyrie, his strength unmatched. Elias, by comparison, looked smaller, weaker. The fight seemed like a joke. Zyra leaned forward, her sharp eyes locked on Elias. She had given him this chance, not expecting him to survive, but because she wanted to see, truly see, what made humans so stubborn. Vekros grinned, baring sharp teeth. "I will end this quickly, human." Elias smirked. "That's a shame. I was hoping for a warm-up first." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but Vekros growled, already angered. The gong sounded. The fight began. Vekros lunged, his massive fists swinging toward Elias with crushing force. But Elias wasn't there. He had already moved. The human ducked, sidestepped, and twisted out of reach with effortless speed. Each time Vekros attacked, Elias slipped away, untouched. The crowd murmured in confusion. Zyra's eyes narrowed. This wasn't luck. This was skill. Elias stayed light on his feet, never staying in one place for too long. He couldn't match Vekros in strength, but he didn't need to. Instead, he let the Valkyrie warrior exhaust himself, dodging every blow with precision. Vekros roared in frustration. "Stand and fight, coward." Elias grinned. "Why? This is much more fun." The Valkyrie warrior charged again, this time with full force. But Elias saw it coming. At the last second, he dropped to one knee and swept his leg under Vekros, knocking the massive alien off balance. Vekros crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact. The arena fell silent. Zyra's fingers tightened on the armrest of her chair. This human was more than just stubborn. He was strategic. He was thinking his way through the fight. Vekros pushed himself up, fury in his eyes, but Elias didn't let him recover. He moved in swiftly, delivering a precise strike to the Valkyrie's throat, just enough to stun him. Then, with a quick motion, Elias flipped him over, slamming him back to the ground. Vekros groaned, unable to rise. The gong sounded again. Silence. Then, a single voice spoke. "Cyrus, the human wins." A mix of shock and admiration spread through the crowd. Elias stepped back, breathing hard but smiling. He looked up at Zyra, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite define. "I believe you owe me a request, princess," he said. Zyra's lips curled into a smirk. This human was dangerous. The arena was still buzzing with whispers long after the fight had ended. A human had defeated a Valkyrie warrior, not with strength, but with speed, intelligence, and patience. It was unheard of. Princess Zyra remained seated on her throne, her mind racing. She had expected Elias Carter to fall within seconds, but instead he had done something no one thought possible. He had won. Now she had to keep her promise. Zyra rose from her seat and looked down at Elias. "You have earned the right to make one request. Speak." Elias, still catching his breath, wiped the sweat from his brow and grinned. "Simple. I want to talk to you, without chains, without guards. Just a conversation." Murmurs spread through the crowd. A prisoner, asking for such a thing. It was ridiculous. But Zyra wasn't laughing. She was studying him carefully. He could have asked for freedom, for a weapon, for an escape, but he didn't. Interesting. "Very well," she said. "Guards, take him to my chamber." An hour later, Elias sat in a grand hall, finally free of his restraints. The room was massive, with towering pillars and golden fire lamps casting flickering shadows across the walls. He stretched his arms, enjoying the feeling of freedom, even if it was temporary. Zyra entered, her piercing gaze fixed on him. "You could have asked for anything," she said, sitting across from him. "Why this?" Elias smirked. "Because I wanted to see if you were as fearless in conversation as you are in battle." Zyra scoffed. "You think words are a challenge for me." "Not words," Elias said. The truth. She frowned. And what truth is that? Elias leaned forward. Your empire is strong, but strength alone doesn't win wars. Humans, we may be weaker, but we think differently. We adapt. We unite. That's why you haven't crushed us yet. Zyra's expression hardened. You think your kind has a chance. Elias chuckled. I think that deep down, you're starting to wonder the same thing. For the first time, Zyra hesitated. The Varkari had always believed in dominance, in power above all else. But Elias had proven that power wasn't just brute force. It was strategy, resilience, intelligence. He had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. You are bold, human, she said. But words will not change the fate of your people. Elias met her gaze without fear. Maybe not, but maybe they'll change yours. Zyra stood abruptly, unwilling to let his words sink in further. She turned to the guards. Take him back to his cell. As Elias was led away, he didn't look defeated. He looked victorious. And that unsettled her more than anything. Princess Zyra sat alone in her chamber, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The Varkari Empire had expanded farther than ever before, conquering planets and crushing resistance. Victory was inevitable. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about Elias Carter. No prisoner had ever dared to challenge her with words alone. No prisoner had ever won a fight against her warriors. But Elias had done both, and he had done it with a smile. His words echoed in her mind. Strength alone doesn't win wars. Zyra clenched her fists. Foolish. The Varkari had ruled for centuries through sheer force. His ideas were nothing more than human weakness. And yet, doubt gnawed at her. With a frustrated sigh, she stood and walked through the palace corridors, her footsteps heavy. She found herself outside Elias's cell once again, as if drawn there by an unseen force. The guard straightened at her approach. Your Highness. She raised a hand. Leave us. The guards hesitated but obeyed, stepping aside. The door slid open, revealing Elias sitting calmly against the wall. When he saw her, he grinned. Couldn't stay away, huh? He said. Zyra ignored his taunt and stepped inside, the door sealing behind her. Tell me something, human, she said, crossing her arms. What makes your kind so stubborn? Elias chuckled. We don't call it stubbornness. We call it hope. Hope. Kyra scoffed. Hope is for the weak. Elias shook his head. No, hope is what makes us strong. It's why we keep fighting, even when the odds are against us. Zyra studied him, searching for deception, but there was none. He truly believed what he was saying. You fight for a lost cause, she said. Maybe, Elias admitted, but I'd rather die fighting for something I believe in than live under a ruler who only values power. Zyra stiffened. Careful, human. You insult my people. Elias met her gaze, unafraid. Do I? Or do I make you think? Silence filled the room. For the first time in her life, Zyra had no immediate answer. She turned sharply. This conversation is over. But as she left the cell, her mind was more troubled than ever. Because deep down she knew, Elias Carter had made her think. Princess Zyra sat in the War Council chamber, surrounded by high-ranking Varkari generals. Holograms of battle strategies floated in the air, displaying the slow but steady collapse of humanity's defenses. The war is nearly over, General Kor declared. Another few cycles, and the last human strongholds will fall. Zyra nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Elias Carter. His words had unsettled her more than any battle ever had. She had always believed in the power of the Varkari, in their strength and superiority. But Elias had shown her something different, another kind of strength, one that didn't rely on brute force. And now, for the first time, she questioned if total conquest was truly the best path. A thought she never would have entertained before. The meeting ended, and Sarah found herself walking through the dimly lit corridors of the palace, her feet moving on their own. Before she realized it, She was outside Elias's cell once again. The guards looked surprised but quickly bowed. "Your Highness." "Leave us," she ordered. The door slid open, revealing Elias sitting cross-legged on the floor. When he saw her, he smirked. "Back so soon? I must be growing on you." Zira ignored his teasing and stepped inside, the door sealing behind her. "Tell me, human, what do you hope to achieve?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" "You sit here, a prisoner of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. You should be broken, yet you are not. You should be afraid, yet you smile. What do you want?" Elias studied her for a moment before answering. "I want you to see that your way isn't the only way." Zira narrowed her eyes. "You think your kind can defeat us?" Elias leaned forward. "Maybe not in battle, but in time. If you push humans to the edge, we will find a way to push back. It's what we do." Zira frowned. He spoke with such certainty, as if humanity's defeat was not a final end, but just another challenge to overcome. "You confuse me, human," she admitted. Elias chuckled. "Good. That means you're thinking." Zira let out a slow breath. She was thinking. Too much. This human had planted something in her mind, something dangerous. Doubt. She turned to leave but paused at the door. "The war will end soon, Elias Carter." Elias met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Maybe. But what happens after the war, Princess?" Zira didn't answer, because, for the first time, she didn't know. Princess Zira sat in her private chamber, staring at the holographic reports. Every update confirmed the same thing. Humanity was losing. Their final strongholds were crumbling, their fleets retreating. Victory was inevitable. So why didn't it feel like a victory? Zira clenched her fists. This war had been her purpose since birth. She was raised to believe the Valkyrie were destined to rule, that strength was the only path to order. But Elias Carter had shown her something different. He had no army, no weapons, and yet he had fought her in a way no enemy ever had. Not with fists, but with words. And worse, she was beginning to listen. With a frustrated sigh, she left her chamber and made her way to the lower levels of the palace. When she arrived at Elias's cell, the guards saluted. "Leave us," she ordered, as always. The door slid open, and Elias looked up with his usual smirk. "You keep coming back. Should I be flattered?" Zira crossed her arms. "You should be careful. You are playing a dangerous game, human." Elias leaned against the wall. "And yet, you're still here." Zira exhaled sharply. "Enough games. Tell me, why do you fight so hard for a war you are losing?" Elias chuckled. "Because losing a battle doesn't mean losing everything. You think when this war ends, it's over. You think humans will just submit." Zira frowned. "What other choice do you have?" Elias's eyes burned with determination. "The choice to resist, to adapt, to survive. Even if we fall today, another generation will rise tomorrow, and the next, until we find a way to win." Zira remained silent. This was what made humans dangerous. Not their weapons, not their numbers, but their will. She had been trained to believe war was simple. Strength defeated weakness. But Elias had proven that strength came in many forms. For the first time, she wondered, had the Valkyrie truly won? She turned toward the door, but Elias's voice stopped her. "You don't have to follow the same path, Zira." She stiffened. He had never spoken her name before. Slowly, she looked back at him. "You assume I have a choice." Elias smiled. "Everyone has a choice, even you." Zira wanted to dismiss his words, to call them foolish. But deep down, she knew he was right, and that terrified her. Without another word, she left the cell, but her mind was more conflicted than ever. Because now she was beginning to wonder if she had been fighting the wrong war all along. Zira stood on the palace balcony, overlooking the capital city of the Valkyrie Empire. The sky was filled with the golden glow of their warships, ready to launch the final assault on humanity's last stronghold. Victory was within her grasp. Then why did it feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall? She clenched her fists. Ever since she met Elias Carter, doubt had crept into her mind like a shadow. His words echoed in her thoughts, refusing to be ignored. Everyone has a choice, even you. A choice. She had never considered that before. She was raised to be a warrior, a conqueror. She followed the path her ancestors had set. But now, for the first time, she was questioning that path. She turned sharply and walked with purpose through the grand hallways of the palace. The guards saluted as she passed, unaware of the war raging inside her mind. Within minutes, she reached Elias's cell. The guards straightened. "Your Highness, we were not informed." "Open it," she ordered. The guards hesitated but obeyed. The heavy door slid open, revealing Elias sitting calmly against the wall. He looked up at her, his usual smirk appearing. "Back again. I was starting to think you missed me." Sarah stepped inside, ignoring his teasing. "The war ends today," she said. Elias's smile faded. "I figured." Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to know, Elias. If the Valkyrie stop this war, what happens next?" Elias studied her carefully. "That depends. If you crush humanity completely, rebellion will never stop. But if you seek peace, then maybe, just maybe, we can build something better." Zyra's heart pounded. Peace. Could it even be possible? Could she betray everything she had been taught and change the future? "Trust is not easy," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Neither is war." Silence filled the cell. Then, Zyra made her decision. She turned to the guards outside. "He is coming with me." The guards' eyes widened. "Your Highness." "I gave an order," she said firmly. They hesitated for a moment before unlocking Elias's restraints. He rubbed his wrists, giving her a curious look. "So, what now?" Zyra's eyes burned with new determination. "Now, I make a different choice." She turned, leading him out of the cell. Behind her, Elias smiled. Maybe, just maybe, the war wasn't ending in destruction. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. The Valkyrie warships hovered above the last human stronghold, their weapons primed for destruction. The entire fleet awaited Princess Zyra's command. One word from her, and humanity would fall. But Zyra remained silent. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, staring at the holographic display. Her generals waited, expecting her to give the order. Elias Carter stood beside her, watching carefully. He knew this moment would decide the future of both their species. Finally, General Kor stepped forward. "Your Highness, we await your command. Shall we begin the final assault?" Zyra took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define her rule. "No," she said. A heavy silence filled the room. The generals looked at each other, confused. General Kor frowned. "I do not understand." Zyra turned to face them. Her voice was steady, her eyes fierce. "The war is over." Murmurs spread among the officers. Some looked shocked, others outraged. General Kor stepped forward. "With all due respect, Your Highness, the Valkyrie do not surrender." Zyra met his gaze. "This is not surrender. This is something stronger. This is change." The room fell into stunned silence. The Valkyrie Empire had never backed down from war. They had never sought peace. Until now. Zyra turned to Elias. "Contact your people. Tell them we are willing to negotiate." Elias's lips curled into a small smile. "You won't regret this." General Kor clenched his fists. "You risk everything for a human's words." Zyra stepped closer to him, her voice like steel. "No, General. I risk everything for the future." Kor's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. He knew she had made her decision. Zyra turned back to the fleet's communication panel. She took a deep breath and sent a transmission across the Empire. This is Princess Xyra of the Valkyrie. Effective immediately, all military operations against humanity will cease. We seek a new path, one that does not end in destruction, but in cooperation. The message was sent. There was no turning back now. Elias let out a breath of relief. You just changed the course of history. Xyra looked at him. So did you. For the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Outside, the Valkyrie warships powered down their weapons. The battlefield, once filled with fire and death, became silent. And in that silence, something new was born.